Hi, everybody. It's Sean Kelleher. Um, I run a Substack called Past Paths, and I'm the historian in the town of Saratoga, and I'm here at the Surrender site. This is the site where John Burgoyne turned over his sword to Horatio Gates. Horatio Gates gave back that sword, and then Skeen, a loyalist, gave his sword over to Horatio Gates, and that's the sword that Gates kept. Now, somebody asked me on a tour recently, where was where did Burgoyne's sword end up? And I found out just recently on my trip to Paris that Burgoyne's sword ended up with the Marquis de Lafayette. The sword he gave to Lafayette, he said it was for all of his efforts with the American War, and it is now in a French military museum. So there you go, a little bit of the history. But today I am thinking about Schultz, the um, person who made the Peanuts cartoons, the illustrator. It's his birthday tomorrow, and he was very involved in the Bicentennial. And he had all his Peanut characters, Snoopy and Charlie Brown and Linus, all involved in that Bicentennial. So I'm going to think a little bit about that Bicentennial today and share with you some thoughts about that Bicentennial. Um, and how it might fit into our 250th plans 50 years later. Well, the bicentennial was certainly of a different time. It was a time where our country had just had um, Richard Nixon um, as president, and he left. And Gerald Ford was the president during the beginning of the bicentennial. It was pretty much focused in on 1976, but I certainly remember in 1981 being at the Siege of Yorktown. 1978 was the 200th anniversary of Monmouth. The first large battle reenactment that I ever went to was there in Monmouth. Um, and here in Saratoga, there wasn't much that happened. But the Bicentennial was a different time, had an awful lot of community events. So I remember as a kid, one of the first events I remember is a group of people gathering up to do the Arnold expedition. So they left north of Boston, Marblehead area, someplace like that, and they went up to Maine, and then they went across Maine all the way to Quebec. An astonishing fact. And it was one of those citizen participation things. A group of reenactors did it. I ran into, we had a program here in July where the Grand Master of Masons from Massachusetts, the oldest lodge in North America, was here, and he participated. He's a couple of years older than I am, and he participated in that. He's originally, I believe, from Sudbury or that part of Massachusetts. So his family participated. And then I remember participatorily, um, there are a number of people who took part in what we would call the Rochambeau March. So they left from Newport, Rhode Island, and from Connecticut, and they marched all the way down to Yorktown. Now, they didn't totally march. They were on buses and so on part of the way, but they marched through a lot of towns. And then right here, for the 200th anniversary, we had a group of people who did the Knox campaign, the Knox Trail. So they started up in Fort Ticonderoga. They came all the way down through, that road right below me. You could hear maybe that truck going by. Um, and then they continued on to Albany, crossed at Albany, went up through the Berkshires to Springfield, and ultimately to Framingham and the Siege of Boston. Quite a trip. Um, Going through newspaper reports, I could see that they went right through Stillwater, and there were some people from Stillwater who participated. Pat Niles, who's coordinating our Knox events now up in Washington County, he's the co-chair of Washington County 250, tells me that two Boy Scout leaders came and they participated 50 years ago, and they still remember it, and now they're bringing their Boy Scout troops to participate. So the Bicentennial is a little bit different than 50 years later. We're doing some of the Knox events, but we're doing it on a much smaller scale. Obviously, things are going to start up at Fort Ticonderoga. Actually, they're going to start at Crown Point, and then they're going to go to Fort Ticonderoga the first weekend in December. They have some great activities planned. And then the 12th, we're going to be, there's 4 counties we're all working together. The 12th, we're going to be at Lake George. The 13th, we're going to start at Fort Edward. The 14th will be I'm sorry, the 13th will also be here in Schuylerville. The 14th, we're going to start in Waterford that Sunday morning and then continue over to Cohoes and ultimately end up in Albany. And then in 2026, they're going to be doing some events in Rensselaer County, up in Columbia County, and then Barnstorm across Massachusetts, all ending on March 17th in Boston, in South Boston, Dorchester Heights. So, but our times are different, obviously, between the bicentennial and 50 years later with the 250th. Lexington and Concord was fantastic, but very, very different than President Ford coming to the Concord Bridge with those large crowds as he did during the bicentennial. The bicentennial of Bunker Hill wasn't much. It's very difficult to do Bunker Hill for the 250th. They ended up going north of Boston, and they had a great event up there in a beach park. What are we planning for 2026, and how does that compare to 1976? Well, we're still got tall ships coming in and fireworks shows happening in New York and in Boston. Um, as far as reenactments go, there's a number of reenactments going on in the New York area that the Brigade of the American Revolution is planning. I'm not particularly up to speed on all of them, but I know some of the sites and they're just going to be fantastic. And then, of course, 1777, 2027, we have some big plans. Haven't heard much about Monmouth, certainly haven't heard about Yorktown, but there's certainly time ahead to make those events happen, and hopefully they will. But the times are definitely different. There are lessons that can be learned from the bicentennial. And I have to say that during the bicentennial, not much happened here in Saratoga. They started planning 10 years before in 1967. And by the time they got to 1970, they kind of ran out of steam. Um, so other than Tom Brokaw coming and giving a talk at the battlefield, there wasn't really that much that happened during the bicentennial here. And we're, of course, set out to change that. So we're really looking forward to it. But it's always good to study from the past. At some point, I'll talk about some of the other great commemorations that happened here. Normally every 50 years, sometimes 25 years, there's commemorations that are noteworthy. That history of commemorations becomes part of our important community history. And I hope you enjoyed tomorrow's column on Charles Schultz and the Peanuts. Um, it's a great memory. I certainly enjoy the Peanuts. In fact, I saw one of the Peanut characters out as a Christmas decoration just down the road here at my friend Joe Gerard's house down in Coldwell. So I hope everybody's having a great day. Hopefully the weather will change a little bit. Not the best of days, but you can see right behind me the bas relief from the battles of Saratoga. And if I give you a big enough view, you may be able to see the Hudson River just below us. Hope you have a great day.